welcome to a very intimate 415 Ranger Talk here, and welcome to Minuteman National Park. You guys have probably figured out by now that you are standing on a battlefield. There was shooting and fighting all along this road as the British were retreating on this road, trying to get back into Boston alive. And April 19th, 1775 was a Wednesday. That was the Battle of Lexington and Concord, the opening battle of the American Revolution, and that's why this national park exists. And sometimes when visitors come to this national park, they think, hey, the Pilgrims, they land at Plymouth Rock in 1620. They step off the Mayflower, they eat some turkey with some local friendly Indians in 1620. And then suddenly next year it's 1776 and the American Revolution. And there's a whole 150 years of colonial life that usually is in between those two events that usually gets skipped over in school textbooks. And one of the problems and worries that colonists faced for 150 years here in New England was a problem that you guys have never worried about, never given any thought to, and that was the worry of civil defense and protection. So they relied on a system that they called the Militia System. And the way it would work was under colonial law, if you were an able-bodied male between the ages of 16 and 60, you were required by colonial law to be in your town militia. Now, right now, we've got about 15 people here. I'm going to ask if you're a guy, and if you're between 16 and 60, if you would just raise your hand in the air and keep it up there. Ladies, look around you. This is all you've got to defend your suburb. Okay, thank you. Feel safe. You had to be in your town militia. You had to provide your own weapon and your own ammunition. You got to elect your own officers. And you would train about one day every 3 months. And you weren't paid for this. This was just part of your civic duty and responsibility as a colonial citizen. Now, if I say the two words, jury duty, you've already got some negative vibes going through you, but they did not look at it that way at all. These colonials were a lot more emotionally invested and connected with their colonial towns than most Americans are today. So to them, being in the town militia was a sense of civic pride and responsibility as a colonial citizen. And the way the system would work is, let's say you're off plowing in the field. Off in the distance, you hear that church bell alarm go off. You leave your plow in the field, you run back home, you get your musket and your ammunition, and then you run into the center of town or wherever the rendezvous point was for your town militia, and you responded to whatever the emergency was. Maybe the next town over was being attacked or what have you. And for 150 years here in New England, this whole system worked great. These colonial militias got a lot of valuable combat experience fighting against the American Indians along the frontier. Sometimes these colonial militias would go up to Canada to fight against the French, serving alongside the professional British Army, the Redcoat British Army. Some of these Massachusetts militias, they even took off for the Caribbean. Fighting against the Spanish in Cuba, serving again alongside the professional Redcoat British Army. Now, if you were in one of those colonial militias that was doing one of those extended tours of duty, you did get paid for that time. But other than that, being in your town militia was just an unpaid civic duty and responsibility. Well, let me fast forward to the 1770s. Tensions with Mother England are going from bad to worse in Boston. The Boston Massacre has already taken place. The Boston Tea Party has already taken place. So in the fall of 1774, the Massachusetts colonial legislature sends out word to all the towns in Massachusetts saying, we can tell the situation is getting worse. So we want you as Massachusetts towns to set aside 25% of your best militia. These would usually be 20-something-year-olds who had not yet gotten married, not yet started a family farm. And this 1/4 of the best militia, they're not going to train once every 3 months. they're going to train 2 or 3 times a week. Not only that, they're going to get paid for their training time. Not only that, they have to carry their musket and their ammunition with them at all times because they have to be able to respond at a minute's notice. So if they're going into town on business, they get to carry their musket with them. If they're going to church on Sundays, they get to carry their muskets into church. If they're courting their girlfriend, ladies, doesn't this sound romantic? Next to them on the date is the musket and ammunition. Even when they're sleeping in bed, next to their bed is going to be their musket and ammunition because they have to be able to respond at a minute's notice. So under this new system, let's say you're off plowing in the field again. Off in the distance, you hear that church bell alarm go off. You don't need to run home because you have your musket with you in the field. So you leave the plow in the field, duck underneath the overhead helicopter, and you run all the way into the center of town to the rendezvous point. And under this new system, you've had a half hour to make it to the rendezvous point once the alarm goes out. Now, this elite rapid response force of the general militia, they're not going to be called militiamen. They are going to be called Minutemen. So now you know the difference between militia and Minutemen. Militia is your general male population, 16 to 60. Minutemen, they are your elite rapid response force, your best trained, your best equipped, because they have to be able to respond at a minute's notice. Let me talk a bit about the equipment I've got here. This is a replica of a typical musket of the 1700s. Getting one of these as a 16-year-old colonial teenager was kind of a rite of passage, just like getting a driver's license is today. Buying one of these was about as expensive as a good used car is in today's money. The weapon has 3 parts. You have the trigger or lock mechanism. The wooden part is the stock, and then of course you have the barrel. Each of those 3 parts could be replaced independently of the other 2 if they wore out. But if you wanted to buy an entire musket, you might go to your colonial gunsmith and say, I want to buy an entire musket. I want to buy it lock, stock, and which is where that expression comes from. One of the positions that the trigger can be in is the position it's in right now. It's called the half-cock position. This was a safety device of the 1700s, and if this technology is working correctly, I can put the entire weight of the musket on the trigger and it will not go off. That was a safety device of the time. That's the half-cock position. If you're ever having a heated conversation with your teenager who's maybe not thinking through all the steps they need to go through to finish that science project, you might say, now don't go off half-cocked. There's something preventing you from what you're trying to accomplish. If you measure the diameter of the barrel, it's 3/4 of an inch wide. That makes this a 75 caliber weapon. That's pretty big by modern standards. And it fires a 68 or 69 caliber ball. It's about the size of a marble, as you can see here. That gives you an idea of the size of the musket ball that this weapon would fire. Now, this is not a rifle. A rifle has those spiral grooves that are carved along the inside of the barrel so that as the musket ball is traveling down the barrel, it gets a spin put on it to increase its accuracy. What does a football quarterback do when he throws that football? He puts a spin on it to increase its accuracy, and that's what a rifle does. But this is not a rifle. This is a smooth bore musket, which means that the inside of the barrel is smooth like the inside of a pipe, which means that as this is traveling down the barrel, it's wobbling and bouncing against the insides of the barrel, and it comes out the end already wobbling and pretty inaccurate by modern standards. So this is not a rifle. This is a smooth bore musket. This is also not for hunting. This is a weapon of war. By 1775, this has all been settled, cleared farmland for 150 years. There's nothing left to hunt to speak of left in colonial Massachusetts. The frontier has moved out to upstate New York. Ironically, today, in 2010, inside Route 128, inside the inner suburbs of Boston, there's a lot more four-legged creatures eating your backyard rhododendrons than there was in the colonial time period. But in colonial Massachusetts times, there was nothing left to hunt to speak of left. So this is not for hunting. This is a weapon of war. Loading this weapon is quite a process. There's about a dozen steps you have to go through in between every single shot to reload the weapon. I have here a cartridge box. You're going to see me slap this. That's to settle the black gunpowder that's in here. And inside I have these pre-rolled cartridges. This is something that colonial children could do around the family table to help in the Revolutionary War effort. Colonial children would roll these tubes of paper. They would put a measured, oops, as I drop it there, they would put a measured amount of black gunpowder in here, and then they would also put inside one of these musket balls that I was talking about a moment ago. My cartridges, however, don't have any musket balls inside them. When I fire this replica, I fire blanks. The abbreviation for the National Park Service is NPS. That also stands for no people shot. So I fire blanks when I fire this. But you're going to see me bite off the paper of one of these cartridges. Then I'm going to pour some of the powder into a little pan that's along the outside of the barrel. Then I'm going to shut the pan and then put the rest of the cartridge down in the barrel. Let me just put that guy away. And then once you have the cartridge inside the barrel, then you got to take out your ramrod and ram everything down to the bottom of the barrel. Then you've got to put your ramrod away. Sometimes in the heat of battle, soldiers would get so nervous that they would forget to put their ramrod away. So that when they fire the weapon, off the ramrod goes to the British. That might give you some shish kebab redcoat. It might be a nice thing to do, but if you make that mistake, you won't be able to reload the weapon again. And that's all you have to go through to reload after every shot. What I'm pointing at right now is a little black stone. It's a piece of flint. What I'm pointing at right now is a piece of steel. It's called the steel hammer. And for centuries, mankind had known that when you strike steel with flint, you're gonna get sparks. So to demonstrate that, the weapon is not loaded right now, so when I pull the trigger, you're just gonna hear a click. But when I do pull the trigger, keep your eyes focused right about here, and hopefully you'll see some sparks. See that? One of those sparks will set off the powder that I have put in the pan, and that makes a little mini explosion just a few inches in front of your face. And connecting that pan with the inside of the barrel is a little tunnel. It's a vent touch hole. That mini explosion will travel through that tunnel into the inside of the barrel, setting off the main charge, and the weapon goes off. At least that's how it's supposed to work. As high-tech as these weapons were for the 1770s, the failure rate of these weapons to go off could sometimes be as high as 15%. Nowhere near as reliable as modern firearms. Maybe your flint was getting dull, so when it strikes the steel, it doesn't make any sparks. Or maybe it does make sparks, and maybe one of those sparks sets off the powder in the pan, making that small explosion. But maybe something is clogging that vent touch hole that I told you about, and that explosion can't travel through the tunnel. That's what is called a flash in the pan. It started out promising and then fizzled out into nothing. So in a moment, we're going to try to get a couple shots here, and I'm going to turn it over to my coworker Judith, who's going to give you some instructions. But there's one other piece of equipment I haven't shown you guys yet. 1775, the militia didn't have to deal with OSHA, so I'm going to make some concessions to modern safety, and Judith is going to give you some instructions.